Imagine a ballistic missile tearing through the upper atmosphere at Mach 7. It is a piece of hypersonic geometry falling from the edge of space, carrying enough kinetic and explosive energy to vaporize concrete, steel, and anything breathing within its blast radius. For 40 years, the 9 million people living in Israel have slept under the absolute certainty that if this apocalyptic scenario ever unfolded, a mathematical architecture of survival would catch that missile long before it reached the ground. They relied on a multi-layered, multi-billion-dollar shield of interceptors, radars, and algorithms that constituted the most sophisticated air defense grid in the history of human warfare. Sirens would wail, giving families exactly 90 seconds to reach reinforced bunkers. Radars would track the threat, computers would calculate the intercept trajectory, and the sky would light up with the fiery collision of an incoming threat meeting its mechanical match. That was the reality yesterday. Today, that reality has been erased. Israel is entirely, operationally, and terrifyingly naked. The protective shield is gone. The sirens that once promised 90 seconds of life-saving warning will now give civilians absolutely nothing. Because the very machines required to detect those Mach 7 nightmares are currently smoking craters on hillsides across the country. In a single, flawlessly executed night of military violence, the foundational premise of Israeli survival was systematically dismantled. Do not look away from this, because what happened last night changes the entire landscape of modern warfare. This was not a degradation of capabilities. This was not a temporary setback where backup systems kick in and maintenance crews patch the holes. This was absolute destruction. 14 separate, highly advanced air defense systems were obliterated. We are talking about 5 Patriot batteries, the crown jewels of American-made defense. 3 Arrow systems, designed to kill threats in outer space. 2 David's Sling batteries, built specifically for medium-range ballistic killers. And 4 Iron Dome systems, the famous guardians of the population centers. 14 systems, wiped off the map in a matter of hours. The radar systems that act as the brains, the launcher vehicles that act as the fists, and the command posts that link them together were specifically targeted and violently dismantled. They were hit with such precision and overwhelming coordination that not a single battery could protect itself, let alone its neighbors. When the sun rose this morning over the Mediterranean, a nation the size of New Jersey, heavily fortified and perpetually on a war footing, woke up with zero meaningful air defense against an adversary that is still actively firing. To comprehend the sheer scale of this military catastrophe, you have to understand the monstrous threat environment of this war and how exactly Israel's shield was supposed to work. This was not a single weapon system. It was an integrated, layered architecture where each layer covered the blind spots of the other. The bottom layer was the Iron Dome, engaging rockets up to 70 kilometers away. The middle layer was David's Sling, hunting down the larger, faster ballistic missiles falling from 300 kilometers out. Above that was the Arrow system, reaching into the exo-atmosphere, catching Iranian missiles in the cold vacuum of space before they even began their terminal descent. And backing up this entire staggering network was the American Patriot system, positioned around hypercritical nodes like Tel Aviv, Haifa, and the Dimona nuclear facility. They relied on a digital handshake. If a missile flew too high for the Iron Dome, it was handed off to David's Sling. If it was too fast, the Arrow took it. But if you violently remove enough nodes from this network, the handshakes fail. The entire grid collapses. And last night, Iran did not just poke holes in this grid, they shattered the entire structure. The way Iran achieved this is a masterclass in modern electronic warfare and lethal geometry. For years, military strategists have quietly discussed a fundamental flaw in air defense systems. These multi-million-dollar batteries are brilliant at defending cities, but they are incredibly vulnerable when defending themselves. Every radar on Earth has a physical blind spot, a detection gap dictated by the laws of physics and geometry. There is a blind spot directly beneath the radar's emission pattern. There is a blind spot at extreme elevation angles directly above it. There are shadows cast by the surrounding mountains and valleys. You cannot fix this with a software update. As long as the physical radar exists, the blind spot exists. What Iran did last night was deploy years of meticulously gathered electromagnetic intelligence. They did not just know where the Israeli radars were. They knew their exact orientation, their specific emission patterns, and the precise topographical shadows surrounding them. Iran built a bespoke, custom-tailored targeting solution for all 14 Israeli systems. They launched missiles along highly specific altitude and angle profiles, deliberately flying them inside the physical blind spots of the radars. By the time the incoming missiles entered the detection envelope of the Patriot and Arrow systems, they were only 4 seconds away from impact. Let that sink in. 4 seconds. Under perfect textbook conditions, a Patriot system takes between 6 and 8 seconds to detect a threat and launch an interceptor. Iran engineered an attack that arrived 2 to 4 seconds before the defensive system could even pull its own trigger, and they executed this in a lethal sequence. They struck the southern radars first, completely blinding the early warning network for the center of the country. Then they struck the center, isolating the north. By the time the final wave came down on the American-supplied Patriot batteries, the integrated network was dead. The Patriots were fighting alone, blind, and isolated, and they were annihilated. The human reality of this military failure is almost too massive to process. For nearly 3 weeks of sustained combat, the Israeli civilian population has been protected by a model relying on detection, warning, and interception. Today, detection is gone because the radars are burning. Warning is gone because without radars, the only alert a civilian will get is the deafening roar of a ballistic missile in its terminal dive, mere seconds before the shockwave hits. Interception is gone because the launchers are destroyed and the interceptor missile stockpiles were already critically depleted. 9 million people are now living in a reality where the next Iranian ballistic missile will travel for 10 minutes across the Middle East, cross into Israeli airspace, and violently impact its target without a single siren sounding. The explosion will be the very first indication that a weapon was ever fired. This is not a theoretical scenario for wargamers to debate. This is the terrifying, unvarnished operational reality on the ground right now. But the nightmare does not end with the civilian population. Militarily, Israel's entire offensive strategy has just been thrown into absolute chaos. For weeks, Israeli F-35 pilots have been flying deep strike missions, launching naval operations, and conducting ground maneuvers under the psychological and tactical safety of a protected home front. A fighter pilot flies differently when he knows his family back in Jerusalem is safe behind an impenetrable shield. He takes on different risks. Today, those pilots are strapping into their jets at air bases that have zero protection. The runways, the ammunition bunkers, the aviation fuel tanks are all completely exposed. When an Israeli jet takes off for a strike mission today, the pilot knows that by the time he returns, his base could be a cratered ruin. Iran can now strike Israeli military infrastructure with the same ease and precision as hitting an empty field. The compression of time available for Israeli offensive operations has completely altered the strategic picture, and then there is Dimona. The Dimona nuclear facility is the most heavily guarded, highly classified, and critically sensitive location in the entire region. Any damage to this site would unleash a radiological and geopolitical catastrophe that would dwarf everything that has happened in this war so far. The Patriot batteries that were specifically positioned to physically shield the nuclear reactors are among the 5 that were destroyed last night. The aero systems that were supposed to catch a ballistic missile falling from space toward Dimona are critically depleted and burning. Dimona is naked. That fact alone should be the headline of every intelligence briefing on the planet right now, yet the official statements remain eerily, deliberately vague. This military disaster has birthed an immediate existential political crisis in Jerusalem. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is facing the most severe domestic pressure any Israeli leader has seen since the catastrophic surprise of the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Just days ago, Netanyahu was standing at a podium projecting absolute strength, insisting the home front was secure and the enemy was being degraded, even as sirens wailed in the background. Today, the gap between that official political narrative and the smoking wreckage of 14 air defense systems is impossible to hide. Netanyahu promised a swift and decisive victory. Instead, on day 19 of this conflict, the country is totally exposed. Netanyahu's political survival relies on continuing the war, but his military commanders are staring at a completely different reality. The defense establishment knows that fighting a prolonged war without an air defense shield is a recipe for national suicide. The political desire to fight and the military necessity to survive are now pulling in violently opposite directions. Look at the terrifying evolution of the official statements over the last 3 weeks. On day 3, officials boasted about historic intercept rates. On day 10, they claimed the enemy's capabilities were degrading. By day 14, independent reports leaked that interceptor missiles were running dangerously low. And today, on day 19, with 14 systems utterly destroyed, the official statement simply reads that the military is responding vigorously. They do not use the word destroyed. They do not use the word naked. They say responding vigorously because admitting the absolute collapse of the nation's air defense would trigger mass panic. In Washington, the panic is already happening behind closed doors. The United States is now forced into making the most consequential decisions of this entire conflict, and every single option is a nightmare. Option 1 is an emergency airlift of Patriot batteries from Europe. But you cannot just overnight a Patriot system. It requires massive logistical effort, disassembly, heavy airlift, reassembly, and integration into a network that no longer exists. Even under perfect peacetime conditions, that takes at least 72 hours. In a war zone with destroyed infrastructure, it takes much longer. Option 2 is moving American naval destroyers equipped with the Aegis combat system closer to the coast to use their interceptors to shield Israeli cities. But the U.S. Navy is already facing severe missile depletion from defending the Red Sea and the Gulf. They simply do not have the infinite magazine depth to replace an entire nation's ground-based defense grid. Option 3 is negotiation. And this is the bitter pill that no one in Jerusalem wants to swallow. Without an air defense system, Israel cannot sustain a prolonged war of attrition against an enemy that has just proven it can destroy advanced radars faster than America can build them. Iran has laid out its ultimatum clearly: stop the strikes and remove American bases. Under normal circumstances, this would be laughed off as aggressive posturing. But today, with a naked home front, it is a brutally realistic settlement offer. The global heavyweights know this, and they are moving incredibly fast. Within 2 hours of the radars burning, Russia issued a highly calculated diplomatic statement. They didn't cheer, and they didn't condemn. They demanded an immediate ceasefire. Russia recognizes that the collapse of Israel's defense could force the United States into a direct, all-out regional war, which would disrupt global oil markets and shatter the energy revenues Moscow relies on. Russia wants the bleeding to stop right here, right now, before the entire Middle East burns down. China moved even faster. Beijing dropped a fully drafted 5-point peace proposal demanding a ceasefire, humanitarian corridors, and a new security architecture. You do not write a comprehensive 5-point international treaty in 2 hours. China has been sitting on this document for days, waiting for the exact moment when the military reality on the ground became so desperate that the combatants would have no choice but to listen. The destruction of the air defense grid was that moment. Simultaneously, the Arab world shifted. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Jordan, and Egypt released a joint statement demanding an end to the fighting. These are nations that host American military bases. They are publicly breaking from the U.S. position because they can see the writing on the wall. The military path has reached a dead end, and if the war continues, the missiles will soon be falling on their cities too. Even NATO has convened emergency, closed-door sessions to figure out what happens if an American treaty partner faces complete annihilation. But to understand the true horror of this moment, you have to look at what Iran has actually been doing for the last 19 days. They haven't been fighting the main war. They have been preparing the battlefield. Iran has systematically hunted down and destroyed the E-3 early warning radar planes. They destroyed the underwater drone networks. They blew up the forward ammunition supplies. And last night they blinded and shattered the Patriot, Arrow, and Iron Dome systems. Every single move was a calculated step to remove the shield. Why? Because the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has not even fired their new weapons yet. The hypersonic Fattah missiles, the upgraded K-bar-Shikan ballistic killers, the massive underground stockpiles that have been waiting in hardened silos for a decade, they haven't been launched. The last 19 days were just a demolition operation to clear the path. And today, the path is completely, terrifyingly clear. We are currently sitting inside a rapidly closing diplomatic window. It is a window of maybe 48 to 72 hours where a ceasefire is actually possible. Iran has achieved its tactical goals. It has humiliated the American and Israeli military establishments, blinded their radars, and proved its technological dominance in electronic warfare. They do not need to fire their hypersonics to prove they can win. The burning Patriot batteries prove it for them. America is desperate to avoid a broader war. The Israeli military knows it cannot defend its own skies. The global powers are demanding peace. The conditions for a negotiated exit will never be better than they are right in this exact second. But this window is ticking down. Because if the diplomacy fails, if the stubbornness of politicians overrides the brutal reality of military logistics, the next phase of this war will begin. And when that phase begins, it will be fought with weapons that cannot be intercepted, raining down on cities that have no warning sirens, striking hospitals, schools, and homes that have no defense. The 9 million people who woke up today in a naked country are staring down the barrel of a historical catastrophe. 14 advanced air defense systems were wiped out in one night. 19 days of preparation are complete. The path is clear. The missiles are fueled. And the clock is running out faster than anyone is willing to admit. What happens in the next 48 hours will not just decide the outcome of this conflict. It will permanently rewrite the rules of survival in the modern world.